This is gonna be my weekly forecast for basically DXY, Euro, GBP, USDJPY, Gold, and Bitcoin, and overall my trading plan for upcoming week. This week might gonna be a little bit tricky, especially I would say the first half of the week, because again, when I watching the Forex calendar, basically majority of the news, so assuming also the most volatile day is gonna be likely Wednesday and the Thursday. So basically the second half of the week, just like we had basically this or the previous week. If you already seen my previous weekly forecast, I was basically projecting to going or basically having some long setup towards these heights, which I already even posted the execution. I was trading basically this entire move. And as soon as we can actually go into the daily is gonna be maybe for you guys really insightful, because if you don't have that much time to trading intraday just like me, I think looking at the daily and following maybe 1 hour or 4 hour time frame structure can be really such a huge help. So what we having here, or what we had, was basically as soon as we filled this imbalance which happened on a Tuesday, we had a really strong rejection. I wouldn't say this is like clean sell setup, but based on how we react in this specific level after having some drop, we either gonna be ranging in the market or continue to the downside. Again, in hindsight, we break to the downside, but I always like to reading the price action in this particular way just to be a little bit more cautious. Basically what I like to do is basically seeing how we are reacting of a certain level, and based on that I'm doing some kind of assumption and having my trading plan. But after the Wednesday, it's much less likely that we will push price higher. It's more likely that we will come for basically the previous daily low and eventually this Monday. Because basically Monday we open up with some particular gap. As you see, we actually open up with a pretty significant gap that we eventually fill. This was actually beautiful structure to the upside, quite a bit clean to trade in my opinion. And also at the same time, just notice how we basically react of this daily imbalance on the 1 hour time frame. This was also a really nice sweep and really clean structure to the downside, which eventually I traded intraday. Basically what you're seeing here, that's basically some type of signals that I like to trade. So overall, even though we had this really nasty open, eventually I would say this was a really clean price action. I believe this week is gonna be a little bit, I believe this video like overall is gonna be a little bit shorter than the previous one, because there are not many scenarios, at least so far. Because what we having in the most of the pairs is really huge push either to the upside or the downside. So usually what you can expect after, you know, having some push, well, usually you having two scenarios in most of the cases. Obviously you can also reverse like really hard, but I would say that's probably gonna be very unlikely. My two scenarios is we either gonna keep having the momentum to the upside or slowing the momentum but having this like slow grind to the upside, or we will eventually having some decent pullback. And by decent pullback I also mean it's more likely gonna be ranging for basically preparing for the Wednesday or the Thursday, and then I would assume that's gonna be basically these 2 days more likely gonna be my major setup. I'm actually not having that much expectation coming to the Monday, but I would assume that basically as long as we holding this gray area, basically you can think of it as a support and resistance, I would still be looking for the buys as long as this DXY gonna hold in this zone. I basically projected from the previous week that we likely to continue higher, so basically my bias was correct, but we did not tap into this imbalance. We basically having immediate rejection followed by basically 3 consecutive pushes to the upside. So that was pretty clean. Now if we actually seeing we having a significant level that probably I would say we gonna break through, but again I'm gonna be a little bit skeptical or a little bit conservative when it comes to the Monday open, because it could happen as well that basically what if you're watching or if you're following some, economic news, things like that, things are, overall in the world not looking really optimistic. So there can be also another scenario that we gonna get up or down. But overall, as long as we holding this zone, I'm gonna be basically bullish bias on the dollar. Moving to the EURUSD, I was actually really kind of curious to see if we will have some potential, basically snowflake, I call it, bounce setup, because usually when I see such a really sharp move and we having consolidation, this area, this kind of POI usually is pretty decent to giving at the very bottom some decent push for intraday setup. But also because I'm not gonna be trading Asia session, I'm gonna be a little bit skeptical and a little bit conservative, because we can even have further push to the downside based on the 1 hour or even the 4 hour. I would say mostly based on the daily candle closure. It seems to be that we wants to basically break this low. So going to this week, my basically initial setup or the trading plan for the euro will be actually really simple. I'm gonna be either waiting for the price to pull back to give me some short entry towards this low, or just in case we're gonna open up on the Monday prior to the London and already break this level, I'm gonna be waiting patiently if we will have potential reversal, basically some mean reversion type of trade towards this daily candle. If that's not going to be happening and we keep pushing price to the downside, I would consider that this is going to be my next basically point of the interest for a potential either bounce or the reversal. When it comes to hourly, obviously this is going to be basically my very last pullback before we continue to the downside. So I want to see if we will have that additional, beautiful, clean pullback and continuation to the downside of this area. Eventually, you can think of it, if we happen to have this type of basically scenario, some type of sweep right here, I'm gonna be looking for intraday setup only. I think for this specific price action, it's really premature to having a really clean 1 hour time frame setup, because obviously the market is starting to expanding. Also based on some stats and the indicators that I'm having, they are basically currently really expanding. So I'm a little bit more conservative, a little bit more safer when it comes to my prediction or the trading plan, and I rather to squeeze some really clean trade and just trying to catch a really some continuation setup rather than calling the bottom or the top. Going to the GBPUSD, I could also see that this more likely having some potential bounce basically of this area, because if we look at the entire structure, so we break the structure of basically these highs right here, and this is basically that lowest point. I'm actually going to be making the structure video, so this is basically a 3-point method or 3-point structure. Also because we're having such a beautiful manipulation on the bottom side before we break this high, this is actually a significant point of the interest, I would say. So I would, if I have to bet, I would be expecting basically around this area some type of bounce. I don't know how big this is going to be, but I would assume this zone is likely gonna give you basically some, I'm not saying reversal. Obviously I cannot predict that we going to be trending to the upside right here. But what I'm saying is cause and the effect in the market. This piece of price action right here has a really significant basically movement to push price here. So solely based on cause and the effect, this zone is likely to gonna have some bounce. But basically similar to the EURUSD, I'm gonna be just waiting for the very first few days how we gonna be reacting around the zone. If we happen to coming back here basically to this origin, you can think of it as a break and the retest. I think this would be actually a pretty decent area for continuation to the downside. And for ideal reversal to the upside to maybe even get to this point, I think it would be, if we not going to go right away, I think it would be really beautiful if we going basically into one of these levels right here and we're gonna bounce from that. And that's going to be the case, I will more likely gonna be watching 1 hour time frame or 15 minutes to giving me that additional basically volume candle and confirmation. Now, if you remember the EURUSD, I was actually rather bullish, I would say, expecting a little bit push to the upside, especially for basically this level. And eventually what we had, we actually got what I wanted. So if you remember, I was saying that this piece of price action is very sufficient because we're having a really clean setup all day long. Eventually the Monday has been a little bit tricky because this is usually a bearish sign to going for the reversal, which was also one of the cases. So basically the very next day we said no, and we having a decent bullish candle closure with another really strong momentum. So basically the following 2 days, I would say, has been a pretty much one-sided. And also seeing this, I would still be favoring a little bit higher prices, but based on my experience with the Japanese yen, usually what I saw multiple times, we actually reverse to the downside. I'm not saying we would reverse like that much, but usually before having a significant high to be taken, we usually having this kind of like a hiccup or the pullback. I'm gonna be a little bit conservative when it comes to this basically taking profit level or the level to be targeted. Also seeing this daily push, I still kind of feel like we have the potential to push price higher. Because we failed the Monday, and because we also having this inefficiency right here, this will be actually a really significant area for me if we happen to having the pullback and push price higher. This is you can think of this as my really important long setup area if we happen to basically maintain this bullish order flow. Because also if we're looking at the 4-hour candle closure, we actually having a really decent, I would call it a volume candle to the upside. So we still having this bullish, basically bullish momentum. And also seeing the basically Euro and the GU, I could imagine that on the Monday we will have this continuation, because eventually based on this stair-stepping case structure, I would like to see the continuation basically from this level going upwards, at least for some 15-minute type of setup. Now for the gold, I would say we're gonna be a little bit bearish this time, because I wanted to see how we're gonna react around this imbalance. So my bias was basically towards this high, and that's what we actually eventually got. So we held, or basically if you're paying attention to, I mentioned that I want to see some continuation from this zone, and if you actually paying attention to the body candles, we never closed below this particular range. So this was actually a really decent indication that we will going to take out this level, and we'll see how that's going to basically play in the future. Obviously in hindsight now we can say that we basically fail and we having reversal from here. It could be also one of those days where we would having this like triple, you know, bottom, and then we will push maybe around this level. But also seeing the higher time frame, I would be favoring basically a little bit more lower prices, just solely based on the daily, and potentially I could imagine we would go at least towards this level, these accumulations basically right here, and see if we will have this initial reaction from basically from this point. But I would say pretty much if I extend it to, let's say, this basically volume gap, or I don't know how, whatever you want to call it, also overlaps with this point of the interest. So this would be also one of these areas that I would still consider to looking for the buys. But so far, I am more inclined to looking for intraday, basically 15-minute time frames. And lastly, Bitcoin. I would say Bitcoin was basically the only setup that didn't play out as I was expecting. But also at the same time, if you're looking at how we basically spending so much time in this range. So I would say basically from Friday 6th February, we basically stuck in this particular range. We could also highlight the bodies of these two candles, and it would give you literally the entire basically framework that we've been trading. Also seeing the weekly, we have the potential initially to push price higher. I was saying that I basically want to see some basically reaction from this level, which would means that we need to tap into this low and give me that like sweet bounce. This is basically the bread and butter scenario I would like to trade. But based on the weekly candle, it also will be really interesting how we're gonna be basically opening for the Monday. Because if we happen to break basically this level and close below, well, I would be more inclined to push price lower. If that's not going to be happening, I would be inclined to basically going for the imbalance right here. But overall, seeing how we are stuck in this range, at the same time marking out this high, we did not basically tap into this high. So if we happen to continue higher, I could imagine this is going to be one of those days where we either going to have this really beautiful, and I would say maybe a little bit painful squeeze to liquidate a lot of sellers. But as long as we gonna be, you know, deviating from this range and coming back, I would still be a little bit more conservative and looking for this like intraday setup towards this kind of mean. Also, I think it's really important to mention that we kind of building up a really steady basically price action right here, so I can expect in the future we will gonna wipe basically these last 5 days. Overall, this piece of price action is not looking as good for neither buys or the sell setup, at least to my likings. For the sell setup, ideally I would need to basically have the manipulation right here, and for the long setup I would need to at least coming back to this bulk of volume and giving me some basically manipulation. But like the biggest ideal scenario for the long setup would be to coming back all the way low, and basically as long as we're gonna be respecting this piece of price action, I will be looking to basically buy. I'm gonna be definitely, because EURUSD is my bread and butter, so EURUSD is going to be my main priority. I would say the gold is worth to putting some alerts and basically coming back a little bit later on what is likely gonna be happening around this area. This could be really important. For the GBPUSD, I would also set some alerts. And for the Japanese yen, I think it's gonna be really interesting to trade, especially on the Monday. So I hope you find this insightful. Have good luck on your trading and see you next week. Take care.